My abs. It's time to study. It's time to, like, that whole bit was, it's time to study.
Great people want to say, voice some ideas. Right? So, if people are still not necessarily aware of what biodiversity means and how it matters to them and why this is all important, I think part of it is the slower process. Right? If we look at what we were like 100 years ago, 50 years ago, a very different world to what we are now, but it's changing every year at a slow rate and you just don't see it quite so much. What we're going to do in the next little while, right, is go through the primary drivers of through in this next bit. All right, so we might as well make a start and finish off this next bit. All right. So what I wanted to do in the last session, what I talked about there was, okay, there are lots of drivers of biodiversity loss out there, and
Oh my god, 2 people. What's up? My 2 loyal subscribers. Hope y'all are having fun. Oh, 1 person left. Okay, bye-bye. Yeah, I'm just studying. You know what time it is.
And etc. And factors that we have to sort of think about and deal with conservation biology to overcome these issues. Right? And this is one of the key ones. Right? So lots of textbooks will tell you that the reasons for biodiversity loss and extinctions at the moment are really related to habitat degradation and loss. Right? So we're going to work through in this next bit, both of those, habitat degradation and loss. To habitat reasons for overcome out there and to do it. So eventually come All right, so we might as well make a start and finish off this next bit. All right. So what I wanted to do in the last session, what I talked about there was, okay, there are lots of drivers of biodiversity loss out there and extinction, and factors that we have to go out and deal with in terms of our conservation biology to overcome these issues. Right? And this is one of the key ones. Right? So lots of textbooks will tell you that the reasons for biodiversity loss and extinctions at the moment are really related to habitat degradation and loss. Right? So we're going to work through in this. Next bit, really will tell you that reasons for biodiversity loss and extinctions at the moment are really related to habitat degradation and loss. Right? So we're going to work through in this next bit, both of those, habitat degradation and loss in these ecosystems. Right? So same deal as last time, but think about some questions. Right? So what I would say is that, like I said, there's some habitat degradation, loss is most serious to biodiversity. Right? We're going to work through a little bit of habitat degradation and extinction in New Zealand. We're going to do a bit of comparison of degradation events, and we'll have a little bit of a case study of amphibians. Amphibians aren't really my thing, but I'll suffer and talk to you about amphibians because it's a really good study that I'll go in science that was done along those lines. And so in terms of like essay questions or questions to start thinking about for final grants and stuff, that would be a good one. Compare and contrast habitat degradation and its effects on both seafloor and for final. We'll have a little bit of a case study of amphibians. Amphibians aren't really my thing, but I'll suffer and talk to you about amphibians because it's a really good study that I'll go in science that was done along those lines. And so in terms of like essay questions or questions to start thinking about for final grants and stuff, that would be a good one. Compare and contrast habitat degradation and its effects on both seafloor and forest decay. How those two, bottom floor and seafloors or forest, how those two two sorts of things similar. Right, so we'll do that. Right, so we're going to work through habitat degradation loss, the most serious threat to biodiversity, right? And we can see that in a whole bunch of different systems, right? So there's a recent set of figures, right? 83% of the Earth's surface has been transformed by human activity, so we've modified it in some ways, we've clear cut it and left it room in a while. We have degraded or unsustainably used an awful lot of that 83%, right? So 6% have degraded, 20% of coral reefs have been destroyed. That becomes really important when you start to understand how much biodiversity you can typically find on a coral reef, right? And 35% of mangrove ecosystems have been destroyed. Same sort of deal, huge biodiversity sources in those environments. Right, so lots of the world's earth has been transformed by human activity. Lots of it is being used, it's degraded or being unsustainably used. Lots of it has been destroyed, is the bottom line for that. We work. Lots of it is being used, it's degraded or being unsustainably used. Lots of it is being destroyed, is the bottom line for that. We work through a whole bunch of different ecosystems, right? So here's a whole bunch of different ecosystems. Fraction of potential area covered, converted. Fraction of potential area converted, going from -10, right, through to 100% that's been converted. And a whole bunch of different, so Mediterranean forests. Woodland and scrub, we've got temperate forests, tropical and subtropical forests, we've got deserts, we've got boreal forests, we've got tundra, all the way down here. Yep, this is around the world. So I put this up one in Europe as an example, right? So this is throughout the globe because Europe, but what this sort of nicely does is it shows where an awful lot of the world's change has occurred is where people live, right? So this is an area of a forest in Europe. You see there's very little forest in the UK because it's got high density people. Lots more forest in where it's too bloody cold to live, right? So nobody wants to live up here in the Soviet Union or low density in Estonia, and so, those sorts of things. So where people are living is where we've had the biggest effects, right? So if we look at areas of tundra and boreal forest, which is really north, right? Very little change in those. we look at where the biggest changes have occurred, temperate forests, where we like to live, where there's been massive amounts of area that's been converted. Some of it has actually been converted into pine forest and things like that. Right? So we've actually put areas in New Zealand in pine forest, but Mediterranean forest and scrub and all that sort of thing. And you can see rates of accelerating. So here's rates by 1950. Here's rates between 1950 and 1990, right? And predicted loss by 2050. Really high in tropical and subtropical forests and all that sort of thing. Right, so we are changing ecosystems, we are experiencing habitat degradation and loss where we live, right? And it's projected to be in some different areas, so it's predicted to be quite high over here in tropical and subtropical grasslands over the next few years. Right, so 50 and 1990. And you can see rates of accelerating. So here's rates by 1950. Here's rates between 1950 and 1990, right? And predicted loss by 2050. Really high in tropical and subtropical forests and all that sort of thing. Right, so we are changing ecosystems, we are experiencing habitat degradation and loss where we live, right? And it's projected to be in some different areas, so it's predicted to be quite high over here in tropical and subtropical grasslands over the next few years as those sort of third world countries in Africa and Asia get to be more and more developed. Right? So as we're developing those more and more, then we're going to experience more and more tropical and subtropical grasslands being converted and those sorts of things as we progress over time. What the heck is habitat degradation? What's habitat loss? Let's define those. Let's define this. So then habitat loss, if we start on that right at the beginning, right, habitat loss refers to impacts that are so severe that nearly all species are lost, right? So if you are in here and you have native forest, right, that you are just stripping out entirely, that's habitat loss. Right? Habitat degradation, on the other hand, might be related to some limited agriculture going on in the system, some level of burning, the habitat's degraded, but there are some native species that are still living in there. Right? Some subset of species are lost, some subset of species are still living in degradation. Could be pollution that influences fitness, so it might not be trees that are lost, could be a polluted environment, could be whatever is going on in there that's resulting in some species lost. Clearly, loss itself is most severe for biodiversity, habitat degradation is less severe, but if you get enough habitat degradation, then you can have quite substantial change in ecosystems. If we think about how different species, different parts of those communities are changing in different ways, right? So we can imagine that we've got land use intensity, right? So we've got really natural, we've got some level in different ways in ecosystems. Most severe for biodiversity, degradation is less severe, but if you get enough.
I want to so look at Messenger, but no. Look away from distractions. So I got this bump on my head, which is annoying. I don't know if it's like if I hit my head somewhere or if it's a pimple, but goddamn, does it hurt a bit. Ah.
Habitat degradation, then you can have quite substantial change in ecosystems. We can think about how different species, different parts of those communities are changing in different ways, right? So we can imagine that we've got land use intensity, right? So we've got really natural, we've got some levels of degradation that are going on over here to perhaps habitat loss at the really artificial end of the scenario, right? So land use intensity from none through to heavy and habitat loss, right? And we can think about the average remaining percentage of population under each land use, right? You can see we've got birds in this white, right? Amphibians in the solid dark, reptiles in the dotted line, mammals in this dashed line, and plants in this solid grey line. And you can see, okay, if you've got no habitat modification, if you've got natural habitat, then you've got 100% of biodiversity. If you've got the extreme ends, then you've got quite a bit of change, but that change varies according to different species or different groups of organisms. Right? So by this graph, right, where you've got plants are most affected compared to birds, which are least affected by heavy. Why would that be? Any ideas? Yep. Scavenging? Yeah, possibly. Yep. Mobile. I think largely it's related to dispersal abilities. Right, so a lot of these sorts of things, you can think about their dispersal abilities. The things we still see things like tui in cities, although even in Wellington, tui populations are the other day about 10 years at one stage. But because of reindeer and we've had an increase in those.
I'm gonna go get some food or snack or something. I'm getting too distracted. Oh, fuck.
That'll be a feeder ring. Okay.
Glass is bad for you too. Calby's a good boy today. He ate all his medicine without being forced to. He just licked it all up. Good on him.
Our plants and perhaps some mammal. Yeah. We still see dispersal abilities, right? So all the things you can think about their dispersal abilities of things. We still see things like tui in cities, although even in birds in the white, right? Amphibians and the solid native species that are still living in there. Right? Some subset of species are lost, some subset of species are still living, and degradation could be pollution that influences fitness. So it might not be trees that are lost, could be a polluted environment, could be whatever is going on in there that's resulting in some species loss. Clearly, habitat loss itself is most severe for biodiversity. Habitat degradation is less severe, but if you get enough habitat degradation, then you can have quite substantial change in ecosystems. We can think about how different species and different parts of those communities are changing. In different ways, right? So we can imagine that we've got land use intensity, right? So we've got really natural, we've got some levels of degradation that are going on over here to perhaps habitat loss at the really artificial end of the scenario, right? So land use intensity from none through to heavy and habitat loss, right? And we can think about the average remaining percentage of population under each land use, right? You can see we've got birds in this white, right? Amphibians in the solid dark, reptiles in the dotted line, mammals in this dashed line, and plants in this solid grey line. And you can see, okay, if you've got no habitat modification, if you've got natural habitat, then you've got 100% of biodiversity. If you've got the extreme ends, then you've got quite a bit of change, but that change. varies a combination. If you've got natural habitat, then you've got 100% of biodiversity. You've got extreming, then you've got a bit of change, but that change varies according to different species or different groups of organisms. Right? So by this graph, right, where you've got plants are most affected compared to birds, which are least affected by heavy. Why would that be? Any ideas? Yep. Scavenging? Yeah, possibly. Yep. Mobile. I think largely it's related to dispersal abilities. Right? So an awful lot of these sorts of things. You can think about their dispersal abilities of things. We still see things like tui in cities, although even in Wellington, tui populations I heard the other day around 10 years at one stage. But because it's land there, and we've had an increase in those. Things like plants and perhaps some mammals, right? And perhaps some reptiles are less dispersal ability, less able to move around, but then they are just more effective, right? So perhaps over time, if this changed, then dispersal would mean plants and recolonize those areas. There's lots of different species. Different species are quite affected, I think, related perhaps to dispersal as well, but also a bunch of different things. So little riflemen, have a pretty poor dispersal, really high habitat requirements. They need to be in undisturbed habitats effectively. Invasive species affect those quite a bit as well. We can still see in something like Wellington, lots of wood pigeon around, right, in these particularly moderately disturbed environments and kind of urban areas, and certainly lots of tui around Wellington at the moment. They fly everywhere and move around. So different species affected by a combination of dispersal abilities of impacted invasive predators, all those sorts of things come into play in differences between these scenarios going on here. Some depressing features such as over the last 100 years, but half the world's forest has been removed, right, to make way for cropping, pasture, and settlements. Right, and that's unfortunate in terms of forests, right? Well, a range of ecosystem sources, they regulate water, they clarify water effectively, they stop runoff, right? And they have big influence in climate change. We look where forests have been lost, right? So where have they been lost and gained, right? So unfortunately, equatorial regions, lots of forest loss. Brazil at the moment has an interesting president and lots of issues in terms of loss in the Amazon. It's unfortunate that the rainforests in Amazon directly influence the amount of dust, the light absorption, the desertification of Africa, parts of Africa. And those sorts of things. So it's what happens in the Amazon rainforest directly affects what goes on in Africa, and certainly in terms of carbon sequestration and all those sorts of things. Right? The complete destruction, right? So with disturbed environments and kind of urban areas, and certainly lots of tui around Wellington at the moment. They fly everywhere and move around. So different species affected by a combination of dispersal abilities of impacted invasive predators, ecosystem sources. They regulate water, cropping, pasture, and settlements. The depressing features such as these scenarios going on here. Some depressing features such as over the last 100 years, but half the world's forest has been removed, right, to make way for cropping, pasture, and settlements. Right, and that's unfortunate in terms of forests, right? Well, a range of ecosystem sources, they regulate water, they clarify water effectively, they stop runoff, right, and they have big influence in climate change. We look where forests have been lost, right? So where have they been lost and gained, right? So unfortunately, equatorial regions, lots of forest loss. Brazil at the moment has an interesting president and lots of issues in terms of loss in the Amazon. It's unfortunate that the rainforests in Amazon directly influence the amount of dust, the light absorption, the desertification of Africa, parts of Africa. And those sorts of things. So it's what happens in the Amazon rainforest directly affects what goes on in Africa, and certainly in terms of carbon sequestration and all those sorts of things. Right? The complete destruction of tropical forests in Central Africa would reduce the rainfall in Southern Europe and upper and lower US, middle, east, west. Right? So it's in the US's interest to worry about what is going on in Africa, and it's in Africa's interest to worry about what's going on in the Amazon. So these lots of interconnected relationships that are going on in these situations. Let's go back to New Zealand. Right? So this is it's in the US's interest. period of loss in the Amazon. It's unfortunate that the rainforests in Amazon directly influence the amount of dust, the light absorption, the desertification of Africa. And those sorts of things. So what happens in the Amazon rainforest directly affects what goes on in Africa, and certainly in terms of carbon sequestration and all those sorts of things. The complete destruction of tropical forests in Central Africa would reduce the rainfall in Southern Europe and upper and lower US, Middle East, West. Right? So it's in the US's interest to worry about what is going on in Africa, and it's in Africa's interest to worry about what's going on in the Amazon. So there's lots of interconnected relationships that are going on in these situations. Let's go back to New Zealand. Right, so this is a New Zealand study, and it's a cool one that I thought we might as well look at. Right, so bring us home to New Zealand. This is a rapid landscape transformation of the South Island New Zealand following initial Polynesian settlement and then beyond. Right, so they are looking here at charcoal accumulation. So these solid, and it's a cool one that I thought we might as well look at. Right, so bring us home to New Zealand. This is a rapid landscape transformation of the South Island New Zealand following initial Polynesian settlement and then beyond. Right, so they are looking here at charcoal accumulation. So these solid dark in these different graphs, and Polynesian arrival, estimated time of Polynesian arrival. So you can see throughout the system, they look at lake profiles, looking at lakes, and they're looking at the amount of pollen, they're looking at the charcoal accumulation, they're looking at all sorts of things in these lake floors around New Zealand. Right? And the best sort of situation is going on here, right? So here we see charcoal accumulation in the solid black line from 480 to 1280 in Polynesian settlement, then European colonization going on after that, right? And you can see low charcoal accumulation over time. The American long used fires, and as a consequence, we see quite a bit of charcoal accumulation going on in these situations, and that's certainly in all of these little different graphs, and most of these little different graphs around the Horseshoe Lake is one we'll focus on in a bit more detail here, right? So you can see with that Horseshoe Lake situation, small little graph, right? Horseshoe Lake, you can get this paper out. We've got low levels of charcoal accumulation. Polynesian settlement comes along, massive charcoal accumulation. Habitat is being changed and modified at that time. A bit more detail, right? So this is again a graph from this paper. You can get the paper. I encourage you to do so, right? So high severity. Fire events occurred within the first 2 centuries of Maori arrival and were accompanied by transformation of vegetation sites developing lake chemistry. Right, so this time we've got on the y-axis time in years, right? So here's now, around about now, right? Here's going back a couple of thousand years, right? Polynesian settlement somewhere around here. You can see, okay, around about now, right? Here's going back a couple of thousand years, right? Polynesian settlement somewhere around here. You can see, okay, the Maori period, lots of fires, and when people were burning areas to harvest species, those fires decreased around 1680, carried on. We can see as the fires and when people were burning areas to harvest species. species, those fires decreased around 16 AD, carried on. We can see as a consequence of that, lots of changes in the species around here, time and year. Accompanied do so, right? So high severity fire events occurred within the first 2 centuries of Maori arrival and were accompanied by transformation of vegetation, slope stability, and lake chemistry. Right, so this time we've got on the y-axis time and years, right? So here's now, around about now, right? Here's going back a couple of thousand years, right? Polynesian settlement, somewhere around here. You can see, okay, the Maori period, lots of fires, and when people were burning areas to harvest species, those fires decreased around 16 AD, carried on. We can see as a consequence of that, lots of changes in the elements of those cores and residues, right? So one of the changes here, we get magnetic susceptibility. That's an indication of erosion, right? And the stability of the ground. So fairly stable, American long, and to some degree, but then actually Europeans came along and burned off stuff, and we got a lot less stability and a lot more erosion over time, right? And a change in the elements as well. So titanium, which is again is an indicator of erosion and stability, right? But also phosphorus and potassium and all those sorts of things change over time. Massive change when humans, especially Europeans, came along and started intensively farming, started modifying the land use change in a big way. And as a consequence, we see changes in the pollen profile with changes in plants being produced, right? So tussock grasslands started to become really abundant after Europeans came along. Now we started burning things off, associated with a decrease in tall trees, right? So decrease in forests, you get an increase in susceptibility to erosion, you get a change, and you get lots of tussock grasslands, and then Europeans come along and you get pine, right? And grasslands coming into the system. So nice historic analysis of what's going on in New Zealand by lake sediments, right? Maori came along and colonized, lots of fires, lots of burn off, change in the forest community, so we don't have so much forest anymore, right? So forests, small trees, declined in abundance, much more tussock grasslands, and then Europeans came along and changed it into pine trees. So we can see that in historic history, these lake sediments are scattered throughout New Zealand, right? So rapid transformation over the last 1,000 years of New Zealand from forest into tussocks into pine into pasture going on. Associated with those fires, we had rapid extinction of species, and amazingly rapid extinction of species, right? So this is a rapid extinction of moa populations, and this is some mathematical modeling, right? So the human hunting and habitat destruction drove 11 species of moa to extinction in less than 100 years of Polynesian arrival in New Zealand, right? So Polynesians arrival estimated on this particular study to be 1280. Top number of female moas at that time, females are the important ones, us males are irrelevant really. Number of female moas at that time, we see populations that would have remained stable, right? Had there been no harvesting and no habitat destruction. We had habitat loss, right? And harvesting. No habitat loss and harvesting, that's what would have difference. There's only 40 years there in terms of that scenario. So these graphs suggest that over-harvesting, very fast harvesting was the primary driver of extinction of these 11 species of moa, right? But habitat loss probably contributed to it as well, but actually only by a few decades in this situation, in this model. So the extinction of those 11 species driven by primarily harvesting, but also a little bit of habitat change in these situations. What we have done in New Zealand by primarily harvesting, but also a little bit of habitat change in these situations. What we have done in New Zealand is, over the space of well, up to 3/4 of a century, reduced the forest cover in New Zealand from 85%, right? So much of New Zealand forests, high country, alpine zones, those sorts of things, not very different country, 750 years ago. 85%, really echoing those global statistics. Statistics gone down to about 23%, and that 23% largely occurs where we don't want to be, right? So that single intensive decade from 1890 to 1900, 27%, quarter of the forest was cleared and reduced for agricultural goods. And you look at those differences today, New Zealand, as we talked about, has a really large global footprint. Right? We're not really seeing what we've done to our forest situation. So those are forests. If we look at loss and damage to grasslands, savanna and shrublands, right? In terms of what we've done. It's a really large. global ecological footprint, right? We're not clean and green, and you look at that sort of thing and you think, are we good in terms of what we've done to our forest situations? So those are forests. If we look at loss and damage to grasslands, savanna and shrublands, right? So we see this sort of picture, right? So this sort of picture, right? We've destroyed lots of grasslands. We've done things like put cows on them, right? And we've tried to do things like irrigate them, which has resulted in salinification, salting of the earth, right? And that is combined, right? So we've got the biodiversity loss going on over here, which can interact with climate change. And we can try irrigating these sorts of areas, we can try over stocking them, and we lead to desertification. So desertification is a big factor in extinction and biodiversity loss as well. So we're converting grasslands into agriculture, and then a lot of the time, lots of Australia at the moment is suffering from salinification, where it's been done, we've converted the grassland, but it's now too salty to do anything with, and change the law. We've changed our freshwater, it's been done.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, fuck.
Done, we've converted the grassland, but it's now too salty to do anything with, and change the law. We've changed our freshwater system, which degraded or lost, right? So dams, water diversion, extensive wetland loss. In 2018, so not long ago, the current Minister of Conservation, Eugenie Sage, said in New Zealand we've lost 90% of our natural wetlands. 90% of our natural wetlands. So that exceeds the 83% or 85% of the forestry loss in New Zealand. 90% of our wetlands. Large areas of Canterbury, Manawatu, Waikato, and the Bay of Plenty have historically had large freshwater wetlands. Southland had more than 1,000 hectares of wetlands, been lost since 2007. In Southland, more than 1,000 hectares of wetlands been lost in 2007. Lots of these areas we've put in hydroelectric dams. So I think this is down in Oamaru, right? So here we've got Oamaru, we've got the Waitaki system. Waitaki system, lots of dams associated with like Benmore, like Avonmore, like Waitaki, and further north here, like Tekapo and all those sorts of things. Dams, and it's associated with those when eels try and migrate into those systems, and they get chopped into bits, which is what happens when you get an eel trying to migrate through a hydroelectric dam. You get change the law. Really good in terms of. Eugenie Sage said in New Zealand we've lost 9. So we've got some biodiversity loss going on over here, which can interact with climate change. And we can try irrigating these sorts of areas, we can try over stocking them, and we lead to desertification. So desertification is a big factor in extinction and biodiversity loss as well. So we're converting grasslands into agriculture, and then a lot of the time, lots of Australia at the moment is suffering from salinification. Eugenie Sage said in New Zealand we've lost 90% of our natural wetlands. 90% of our natural wetlands. So that exceeds that 83% or 85% of the forestry loss in New Zealand. 90% of our wetlands. Large areas of Canterbury, Manawatu, Waikato, and the Bay of Plenty have historically had large freshwater wetlands. Southland has more than 1,000 hectares of wetlands, been lost since 2007. In Southland, more than 1,000. Hectares of wetland lost in 2007. Lots of these areas were put in hydroelectric dams. So I think this is down in Oamaru, right? So here we've got Oamaru, we've got the Waitaki system. Waitaki system, lots of dams associated with like Benmore, like Avonmore, like Waitaki, and further north of here, like Tekapo and all those sorts of things. Dams, and it's associated with those when eels try and migrate into those systems, and they get chopped into little bits, which is what happens when you get an eel trying to migrate through a hydroelectric dam. You get a drastic change according to irrigation now of the high country in the South Island associated with these systems, right? So irrigation going on up there, diverting the water and all those sorts of things, changing the landscape dramatically in those systems. Look, this is a paper published in the New Zealand Journal of Ecology a little while ago. If you've got really good eyes, you'll be able to see that. But if not, I'll say that this is loss of wetland, right? So what's the announcement? Loss since 1990. Right, it's changing the landscape dramatically in those systems. The paper published in the New Zealand Journal of Ecology a little while ago. If you've got really good eyes, you'll be able to see that. But if not, I'll say that this is loss of wetland, right? So what's the announcement? Loss of wetland since 1990, right? And if we look at all around the world, then we've got some areas such as rate of wetland loss in per year in terms of percent. And so rate of wetland loss, really high rates of wetland loss, really low rates of wetland loss. We've got 8 different areas around the world. We've got North America, Europe. We've got the global average. We've got Canterbury, and here we've got Southland. Southland is higher than the global average. Right? So it's about the global average. Right? So this is the global average here. So you can say, pointed out, we've got massive. So it's about the global average, right? So this is the global average here. So you can say, pointed out, we've got massive changes of wetland, and as she said in that slide here, in Southland, loss of 1,000. So if we look at all around the world, then we've got some areas such as rate of wetland loss per year in terms of percent. And so rate of wetland loss, really high rates of wetland loss, really low rates of wetland loss. We've got 8 different areas around the world. We've got North America, Europe. We've got the global average. We've got Canterbury, and here we've got Southland. Southland is higher than the global average. That's So it's about the global average, right? So this is the global average here. So you can say, pointed out, we've got massive changes of wetland, and as she said in that slide here, in Southland, loss of 1,000 hectares of wetland since 2007. Right, that's only less than 15 years, 30 years. Massive rates of wetland. The predominant cause of wetland conversion is due to agriculture. So we're converting it into agriculture. Right. Degradation of marine systems. Right, so talk about degradation of forests, of pasture, of grasslands. We'll talk about degradation of wetlands. we're now talking about degradation of marine ecosystems. This is a satellite picture in Australia. I think this is Townsville, somewhere down in here, right, and the Great Barrier Reef off it, right. So this is a flooding event in Australia, and high rainfall, agricultural runoff, no trees and grasslands and all that sort of thing that are stabilising the area, lots of erosion, lots of this coming out to meet the Great Barrier Reef, right. So the Great Barrier Reef hit by an extraordinarily large, muddy flood plume that's going on in the systems, and it's hugely important, right. So corals don't tend to do well with the mud. Right? So city areas, lots of marine degradation around city areas, toxic waste, pollution, sedimentation, all those sorts of things that are occurring in there. Right? So on Great Barrier Reef in this situation, so a big system. Go into a little bit more detail about two types of ecological change, impact of fishing on seafloor habitats. Right? Go into a little bit more detail things that. That are occurring in there. Right? So on Great Barrier Reef in this situation, so a big system. Go into a little bit more detail about two types of
Jeez.
ecological change in the system. Sedimentation, all those sorts of things that are occurring in there. Right? So on Great Barrier Reef in this situation, so a big system. Go into a little bit more detail about two types of ecological change, impact of fishing on seafloor, right? Bottom trawling and specifically in comparison to clear felling forest. Right? So let's do a little bit of a case study. Let's look at go into a little bit more detail about two types of ecological change, impact of fishing on seafloor habitats, right? Bottom trawling and specifically in comparison to clear felling forest. Right? So let's do a little bit of a case study. Let's look at these two different types of human impacts. So here's some bottom trawling. Right? So lots of you may not be fairly familiar with bottom trawling. You've got a fishing boat, you've got a net, right? Lots of the fish are on the bottom of the ocean, right? So you've got a fishing boat going along, right? So they're on the seafloor. So you've got to get your fishing net down to the bottom of the seafloor, and you've got to keep it open, right? So you've got to keep it open. So and space apart. That's done to the bottom by these large steel trawl doors, right, that are taken down to the bottom, that scour the bottom of the ocean. Right, so it's scouring the bottom of the ocean, mud cloud goes over the top of it. You can imagine as you're hauling this along, you've got some corals in this situation here. You've got all sorts of things that are dragged. Here's a coral that's dragged onto the fishing boat, right, in order to catch the fish that are down there. Right, so you're fishing the bottom trawling. That's what this is called. You lower these big nets down to the bottom. You're dragging along the seafloor, steel doors, all sorts of things that are affecting those. Right. You can imagine what that does, right? So here's this paper that's looking published in 2008, but it's publishing the effects of bottom trawling on ecosystem function. Here's an area. There's a eco sound basically of the sea floor. Here is a sunken boat that's managed to put in here. And if you put down a camera onto the bottom of that sea floor and look at what it looks like, here's some burrowing shrimp, right? Some burrowing shrimp in there. Right, so lots of burrowing shrimp and healthy floor, right? So lots of animals down there. If you look at in contrast to some pictures of where there's been some bottom trawling, here's some trawl marks, right? So it's scoured along. And in the last line, you can see, okay, you've got this mud cloud and things that are going over, and you can see that mud cloud and it just buries all the shrimp, right? So that physically affects the habitat, right? It also changes. The habitat in terms of whether it acts as a source of sink of nutrient dynamics going on in there. So these authors have found it changes the habitat into cloud and it just buries all the shrimp, right? So that physically affects the habitat, right? It also changes the habitat in terms of whether it acts as a source of sink of nutrient dynamics going on in there. So these authors have found that demersal trawling reduces the density of large body bioturbators, right? So things that burrow into the floor. And these turbators, these insects like the burrowing shrimp, right, have a substantial impact on sediment, water fluxes of nutrients. So if you've got animals, effectively like worms and soil, that are digging out in these environments, it's changing the nutrient dynamics. You get rid of those and you change the nutrient dynamics. Right? This worldwide extent of intensive bottom trawling, right, is likely to be really affect the nutrient balance, especially in continental and coastal areas. Right? So not only is it directly changing the biodiversity bottom trawling enough that you can see it on scans, these are all scar marks of bottom trawling as it's going on in this environment. Fishing boats seem to be only going in one direction in these areas. Not only is it changing the biodiversity directly in terms of the shrimp and the bioturbators, it's changing the nutrient flux that's going on in these systems. So you can think about this in terms of, well, what's the impact of bottom trawling over here on the side in comparison to clear cutting of forests? So a nice little sort of comparison here, right? So impacts on the substrate, right? So impacts on the substrate, clear cutting, well, we know that if you
Oh my God, this is depressing.
you take out the forest, then it exposes soils to erosion, compresses soils, those sorts of things. Bottom trawling overturns, moves, and buries boulders, eliminates lots of micro topography, leaves long-lasting grooves in the soil and the bottom sediment. Right? So those sorts of things. Right. So if we look at the impact on the effect of associated species, clear cutting eliminates most late successional species, encourages pioneer species, so weeds. So you clear cut an area, you'll get some seeds, weeds coming in there, often invasive weeds and those sorts of things coming in those environments. If you do bottom trawling, similarly, eliminates most successional species and encourages pioneer species. Right? So other species that are pioneers that are and come into the environment to start it all over again. Other effects, right? So impacts, right? Recovery. and coming into the environment to start it all over again. Other effects, right? So impacts, right? Recovery to originate to original structure. Clear cutting might take 400 to 200 years, depending on where you're at. Carry trees might take 500 years to get to an adult size, large size. So if you clear cut carry forest, it might take 500 years. Bottom trawling can take a little bit less time, 40 days to 10 years. But the frequency of bottom trawling in these situations is much higher than in clear cutting. Average covered per year globally, 0.1 million kilometres are clear cut every year. 15 million square kilometres are bottom trawled every year. So although communities in bottom trawling might take shorter time to recover, they are much higher rate of destruction and much more frequently are they covered. Right? And we look at the legal state as of all those of conservation protection at the moment. Right? Activity increasingly modified to lessen impacts. So people see forests, they're attached to forests, they like walking in forests. So there's increasing levels of legal protection. But in bottom trawling situations, activity is not allowed in just a few areas, a small amount of the world. Right? So a small amount of marine reserves that are protected from those. Quite different sort of effects going on here, and largely based around public perceptions. The public don't see these quite so much. Public don't see areas that are bottom trawled, don't feel quite attached to mud, don't feel quite attached to shrimp, burrowing shrimp, and those areas. So don't worry about them so much. Right? People see forests, and because they go into that a lot more, they like it. They like to see wombats and they like to see kiwi. They're more attached to it. So again, it comes back to that. I talked about these human interactions and human perceptions. The human component much more associated with clear cutting the forest, much less associated with bottom trawling in these situations. So I want perceptions of the human component. Much more associated with clear cutting the forest, much less associated with bottom trawling in these situations. What I wanted to do to finish up today was to talk briefly about some amphibians, right? So amphibian declines around the world. I thought it's a good way to talk about the relative roles of habitat destruction and exploitation and invasive species and harvesting for a particular group. There's this paper in Public Science and a few years ago now, but it is a really good one in terms of going into detail about reasons for amphibian decline, status and trends of amphibian declines and extinctions worldwide. They looked at a whole bunch of them, so there are 435 species that qualify for listing by the National Union of Conservation of Nature. Right, and amphibians are more threatened and are declining more rapidly than either birds or mammals, so it's an important group to think about. 34 species of amphibians reported to have become extinct, right, since 1500, compared to 129 birds, a lot of those birds in New Zealand, as it happens. 74 mammals, but the strong evidence the situation is worsening for amphibians because of 9 extinctions since 1980. Right? So let's get into the data. Let's have a look. Right. So what are they saying? Hence, because There's of 9 extinctions since 1980. Right? New Zealand, nature. Right? And amphibians are more threatened and are declining more rapidly than either birds or mammals, so it's important to think about. 34 species of amphibians reported to have become extinct, right, since 1500, compared to 129 birds, a lot of those birds in New Zealand, as it happens. 74 mammals, but the strong evidence the situation is worsening for amphibians because of 9 extinctions since 1980. Right? So let's get into the data. Let's have a look. Right? So what are they saying? What are these people finding? They looked at databases, they looked at information from around the world. Overexploited because of heavy extraction, 50 species. Reduced because of habitat destruction or habitat loss, significant habitat loss, 183 species. There's been some species that have gone enigmatic decline, even where several habitat remains, so 207 species. So in this group, the habitat destruction and habitat loss for amphibians in this analysis suggests that, well, habitat loss and destruction is about equal to an enigmatic decline, likely to have been associated with diseases or invasive species or those sorts of things. They looked at this around the world, and around the world, it nicely highlights to a large extent different things are happening in different areas. Right? So different things are happening in different areas. So in different environments, to a large extent, different things are happening in different areas. Right? So different things are happening in different areas. So in different environments. So this is one of the tables, right? Habitat references and biogeographic affinities of these different species. Right. So if you look at habitats, forest, there's lots and lots of species. Right. So 82% of all amphibian species live in forest regions.
Five minutes, let's go.
Right. There are a number of lots and lots. Right. They looked at this around the world, and around the world, it nicely highlights to a large extent different things are happening in different areas. Right? So different things are happening in different areas. So in a different environment. So this is one of the tables, right? Habitat references and biogeographic affinities of these different species, right? So if you look at habitats, forest, there's lots and lots of species, right? So 82% of all amphibian species live in forest regions. Right, there are a number of rapidly declining species that are occurring in forests, and that's what we expect because of forest loss and degradation. Right, and a number of enigmatic declining species, those that are declining from disease or those sorts of things, is quite huge. About 187% of those species that are doing it. Look at biogeographic regions. So we go back here to New Zealand. There are a total number of species in our part of the world that is 219. And of those, there are more species that are rapidly declining. Lots of species are rapidly declining. 7% are rapidly declining. And there are things like chytrid fungus over here that are largely really important. Right. The table, to summarise it briefly, it's been late. The table summarised briefly says lots of species occur in the forest. So we look after our forests, we want to encompass amphibians. There's been lots of species that are rapidly declining, and species that are rapidly declining. Lots of species, number of species in our part of the world that is 219. And of those, there are more species that are rapidly declining. Lots of species are rapidly declining. 7% are rapidly declining, and there are things like chytrid fungus over here that are largely really important. Right. The table, to summarise it briefly, it's been late. The table summarised briefly says lots of species. Occur in the forest, so we look after our forests, we want to encompass amphibians. There's been lots of species that are rapidly declining in those forest ecosystems. New Zealand is not without our problems too. Why? What's going on? This is a nice graph. That's why I like this graph. Right? So this graph is a clearly graphic globe. Right? So we've got a nice picture of the globe. We've got nice and colourful pictures. Right? So and these are reasons for those species declining. So in the green here is reduced habitat. So any areas where there is green, species are declining because of reduced habitat. In areas of blue, we've got areas where things are declining because of over-exploitation. People are harvesting them to eat them. So you can immediately see, okay, in North America, the problems are very different to those in Asia. Right, so in Asia, people are eating things. In North America, people are reducing habitat, but there's also these shades of pink, right, that are going on here that are talking about, well, disease and invasive species. So disease and invasive species is really an important factor here, as well as reduced habitat. There are over here, we've got populations that are primarily reduced habitat. Nobody seems to be eating many frogs, even in France, right? So there's not causes of declines over there, but over here, you've got species that are being consumed. Right? And in New Zealand, we've got some enigmatic decline going on here, largely due to chytrid fungus. It's going on same in a little bit of Australia, as well as some habitat destruction, reduced habitat destruction going on over there. Key takeaway message, right, is that very different patterns are happening in very different parts of the world. Right? Amphibians are being declined. So if North Americans say we are going to stop habitat destruction and habitat loss, that's good for them to conserve their species, but not so good for Asia, where it's largely driven by human consumption. Right, so different families, their species. but not so good for Asia, where it's largely driven by human consumption. Right, so different families are responding differently, right? So the one species down here that is being overexploited, right? So these are the giant salamanders that are in Asia, right? So they're being harvested in a big rate and being consumed, particularly giant. Salamander is the biggest one in China, can grow to be 1.8 meters high, right? So it's a big salamander, right? And clearly probably lots of flesh on it to eat, right? So lots of things going on like that. Here's a Burmese swat frog, which I thought was funny. That's why I put that there for no other reason. So lots of enigmatic decline. Different groups of species are responding differently to different habitat threats. So reduced habitat threat in yellow, right? There are some families that are solely that's their biggest problem, and you can imagine that lots of those families where reduced habitat is the biggest problem are those that are represented in Europe, right, primarily, or sometimes we're in our neck of the wood. And those species where overexploitation, those families where overexploitation is a big factor, those ones are in Asia. New Zealand thought alone are not immune to this, as lots of you will know about Archie's frog, right, conservation frogs in New Zealand. We've got some nationally vulnerable frogs, or those that are declining in New Zealand. Some of these are just amazing species where there's some researchers here, Ben Bell, a researcher in biology, who released these frogs in Maud Island places, and they just don't move more than a metre for decades. They just have their little habitat patch, and they stay there, don't move around at all. Really amazing. Just to finish up, frogs don't always have it their own way, right? So this is an insect, just as a halibut. That's associated with frog places, and they just. Don't move more than a metre, right? For decades. They just have their little habitat patch, and they stay there, don't move around at all. Really amazing. Just to finish up, frogs don't always have it their own way, right? So this is an insect, just as a halibut, that's associated with a frog-eating beetle, right? This frog-eating beetle, this one down the bottom here, right, has these wonderful mandibles on them, right? When a frog tries to eat it, when it grabs it, the frog gets its tongue pierced, the little animal hangs on and sucks it dry. It's not related, it's a natural thing. This is some video from Israel, and here you see this frog slowly being sucked dry and eaten. It's a great example of an insect getting a revenge on a frog, right? Tries to get rid of it, but because these mandibles just sucked on into there, can't get rid of it, can't pull it out, and you can see this frog being decimated over time, and eventually the beetle lets go and falls out. Frog sort of wanders away. The beetle then recovers and thinks, oh, I'll have another go at the frog. So the frog comes over and goes somewhere near it, far too close, and wait for it. Hey, there it goes, and it has another snack of frog. I thought it was just really cool. All right, we're there for today.
Jesus. Heck that. That's cool, but heck that.
We'll see you on Thursday. For those of you that are interested, we are going to have a seminar by Mike Joy, freshwater research, and KKLT. He's quite a famous person in New Zealand looking at the degradation of freshwater in New Zealand. He will be talking in KKLT 301 at Wednesday, 12 to 1 p.m. You're welcome to come. It's with the speaker and prominently in the news. So, cool.
Yeah, I'm just finishing time. Just for one course, but I still need to do the other course. So,
Good morning, kia ora. We'll try that again. Good morning, kia ora. Everyone you like?
sure.
Thanks for the participation last time. That was really good on our first lecture. That was awesome. For those of you in back, who feel like you might be more likely to engage in dialogue, you're welcome to try and be closer. I think we're actually doing better today than we did on Thursday. Remember? Anything big? No, I can't think of anything big. We'll pick up where we left off last time. So we'll talk about within subjects designs. We'll talk about repeated measures design today again, but we'll extend to repeated measures ANOVA. We'll show you how to do that. We'll talk about implications for significant outcomes. Talk a little bit about how to describe outcomes in my not so humble opinion. And then we'll go back to our example that we used for the paired t-test and start fleshing out how we would actually do that research. So I'm trying to get through some of the statistical concepts so that you're good to go with your labs, and then we fill in the gaps along the way and how we actually do things. So that's the plan. Wednesday, we'll get into factorial design, manipulating one factor or manipulating two. And we'll start with an entirely between groups design, and then we'll extend that to one factor being groups and one being within participants. Okay. So slowly, but it's gonna happen fast. It turns out there's another test soon. I'm not sure test is the best word because you don't have that.
Knowledge. Knowledge. Maybe sleep awake in 8 hours. Just do it. Just do it. Hurry up. Get it over with then. Okay.
Having lecture points, so like a glorified course. It is. If you like, especially if you don't find it glory, unless you erase it. I put an announcement up on Blackboard. But I want to reiterate that chapter 6 and 7 in the required textbook. You need to read that. There's a chapter before that, I guess chapter 5, that is on basic descriptive stats. That's just review. You should know that anyway. But I will draw questions from chapters 6 and 7 for the test. So all of that is testable. And you'll find that there's a decent amount of overlap in that with what was on the lecture. But if I don't cover it in lecture and it's in the book, it's still open to be on the test. And as we get closer to the test, I'll give you a better idea about how many questions I'll be going from the book versus lecture. Things that you should be paying attention to. It turns out I know that those things are important to students. But one other thing, and this is going to put probably more pressure on people here, but it could go for anybody in the class. Last time, at the end of lecture, I was standing here and I looked down and I fixed it up. The mic was like this. Oh, that's not very good for sound. If you realize that the mic is dropped off my person, it's more like this. The bottom line is I need help. And that's okay. Everybody needs help. All right. Let's go. Right. So this was us last time. Exciting. So we got through the samples t-test. Those are just components that you need to do the calculation. That's actually your equation. And I showed you my spreadsheet. And I posted that this morning. Just like this. So you should be able to access and download this. Okay. And I've set it up so that it's what's intended to be foolproof. In that you can go and change scores here for X and Y. X and Y could be any conditions. We've set them up here to either be a person has blonde hair or brown hair. These are the only cells that you should be able to change. Okay. That means that you're unlikely to alter something else and then have any issues. Okay. So you can change scores and you can see what happens to your t-value, p-value, see what happens to your figure, your error bars. These are made up data. Right? This is not what we do when we do research. But it is okay to try and gain an understanding of stats. So you're welcome to play with these. I made these up back in 2009 and 2010. Actually, I'm doing some tidy up, making them just a little better for you. And someone back then said to me, "Why haven't we gotten these sooner? These are amazing." I said, "Because I just made them up. And I've never seen anything else quite like it. So these are pretty cool. I don't know of anything else. There's maybe something else out there like it, but I don't know. By the way, in them, I use error bars from standard error. You could use 95% confidence interval. Maybe you should use error bars for something. If you use standard deviation, the error bars are really huge. So visually, people stick to standard error or 95% confidence interval typically. I also prefer standard error over 95% confidence interval, just from the standpoint of when you calculate that 95% confidence interval around your mean, depends on your n. So if you have a sufficiently large n to feel like, yeah, this is a good representation of the population, then that can come from your Z distribution. So basically, you take the standard error and multiply times 1.96. It's close to 2 standard deviations. But if it's, and you can do that when you probably get to an n of 30 or higher. If you're less than that, then you would actually use a critical value of t to calculate your 95% confidence interval. So I end up using standard error. If you use your t value to do that, it's just that your range is going to be a little bit bigger. You're less confident. Than if you use a Z score, because that's your whole population. That's the only difference. So if you have an n of 1,000 and you use a critical t or use a Z 1.96, you're going to come up with the same 95%. So if you're looking at a figure that has standard error versus 95% confidence interval, that 95% confidence interval will be twice. And if your error bars are 95% confidence interval and are not overlapping, then you can look at that and basically know your differences are significant. That's one nice thing about the 95% confidence. If you're looking at standard error, you can't quite tell. The field in general has gotten better about including a measure of variability in figures. That's not what's in it. All right. So we'll return to this. All right. So we'll go to the repeated measures ANOVA. And in this example, our question is, does ginkgo biloba affect memory? I'd like to have a better memory. There are claims that ginkgo biloba does this. The evidence is, there's a dearth of evidence that it's effective. That means you get bupkis. I've seen extremely few studies that are well done, and most of the ones that I know of that have been well done don't produce effect. So why does the health supplement industry get away with saying things? Well, they say, may help with. They don't make any bold claims. So all these different herbs, they can list and say, may help. Turns out that willow bark isn't so bad. Seriously, aspirin, right? Those of you who know, yeah. So there are things out there that can be good remedies, but you want to see. Seriously, aspirin. There you go. Turns out that willow bark isn't so bad. Herbs, making lists and say, there you go. Turns out that willow bark isn't so bad. Seriously, aspirin, right? Those of you who know, yeah. So there are things out there that can be good remedies, but you want to see good studies and see what they're after. If you are interested in drugs, there are two things that you should know. I'm not talking recreationally. I'm talking about medical use. One, it has to be effective, and the other is that it needs to be safe. And then you can have a discussion about what's safe, because lots of drugs have side effects. So it has to be worth the benefit of the drug to take it versus the side effects. And sometimes that's a tough call. So maybe you start increasing a drug at a certain amount, and then that also increases the likelihood of hallucinations. How you play the game of do we do that? So ginkgo doesn't do that. So all these health supplements generally seem to be safe. They don't seem to hurt you, which is also why they get away with things. If people were falling over or having real serious issues from taking their health supplements, then obviously they would be suffering. Mostly, it's a wonderful money-making opportunity. Ouch, to those whose pockets get hurt. So we've got to have a measure. We're going to manipulate something. In this manipulation, we're going to go with whether people get ginkgo biloba or not. And we're going to try and control some things, and we're going to try and attribute cause and effect. And our manipulation, or how we do that, is going to influence the stats we use. That's why the asterisk is there. So the way I've set this up is we'll have three conditions. People take no pill, or they take a pill but it's a placebo, or they get a pill that's got ginkgo biloba. And they'll be blind to whether they're in the ginkgo pill or this and say, wait, turns out that willow bark isn't so bad. Seriously, aspirin, right? Those of you who know, yeah. Hallucination, safe, so something, a pill that's got ginkgo biloba. And they'll be blind to whether they're in the ginkgo pill or the placebo pill condition when they're getting it. Obviously, when they're getting no pill, they know they're not getting anything, right? Not obvious. So with this design, what you can look at is whether actually taking that placebo makes a difference. Okay? So let's do this. That's a little better. All right. So for these repeated measures design, each participant is going to have a score for every condition. I will use an italicized capital P or capital S to mean subject or participants. And we're going to use a different stat. We're going to use our repeated measures ANOVA yes. You're going to get every condition, but obviously we can't do them all at the same time. That is, you can't take the pill, get a placebo, and have a ginkgo. But we'll talk about the trade-offs of that. So there's method to the madness with me picking this particular example. So for the repeated measures ANOVA, there are four major components to doing the calculation. And what we do is square a lot of things when we're doing ANOVAs. And first component is what we call sums of square total. I'll abbreviate that capital SS sub T. Then we're going to have a component that is for subjects. So that's looking at subject variability. We'll have sums of squares for conditions. So that's essentially using our conditions to see how much variability there is based on the conditions. And then finally, we'll have a fourth term that gets abbreviated differently depending on the source. So in the old days, we'd call this conditions by subjects. That's how the subjects are interacting with those conditions. This is going to be the error term, the sums of squared error term, which also gets called residual. So the error term and the residual, it's the same thing. Residual makes sense because it's the last thing that's left over. You'll see that as we take out components. Sorry, my screen is doing funny things. All right. So it's not that complicated. As mentioned before, all this stuff is basic math. So our subset square total, we take each one of our scores, every single one, every participant, every condition, and we're going to square that. We've got capital sigma means we add them all up. So that's that very first term there. And then we're going to subtract what is generally called a correction term. And you'll see this correction term in the different components. And that is, we add up all the scores, so each score, each condition, we add them all up, and we square that total. And then we divide by the number of scores. That's that correction term. So we'll get our total. Then we're going to do it for subjects. So at the subject level, add up each of the scores from the conditions for each subject. So it's a total, one score for all the conditions. And we'll square that. So each subject's going to have that one score added up from the different conditions, squared, and we divide by the number of conditions. And then we subtract out our correction term. Because we're going to do that for as many subjects as we have. Okay? All right, then for our conditions, we're going to take the sum of the scores for our one condition, square it, add it to the other, and then subtract out our correction term, and then finally we're going to have what's left over. All right, and then we can have a table. And I did the components in that order because it fits with the way I've set up this table. So you've got your sums of squared total. There will be degrees of freedom that go along with that. You understand degrees of freedom, right? This is sign language for yes. Give me the yes. I understand degrees of freedom. This is no, I don't have a clue what this man just said. We all yes? Okay, cool. If we don't have the basics, then we're going to stop, right? So we'll have degrees of freedom. We'll have that for the subjects. That's just number of subjects minus 1. Degrees of freedom for conditions. Number of conditions minus 1. And then we'll have our residual or our error term. And that's going to be degrees of freedom from the total, subtract out the subject and the condition. There's another way to get there, but it gets you the same answer. So those are all our degrees of freedom. We need our degrees of freedom to calculate what are called mean square terms. We're going to only have 2 mean square terms. We're going to have one for the condition. That's here. So we take our sums of squared that we got, and we're going to divide it by the degrees of freedom. And we're going to do that same thing for the error term. So our sums of squared for the error, and then degrees of freedom for the error. And then we're going to take our mean square, that is this value, for conditions, and divide by mean square error term. That's our F ratio. That's how we get there. So step by step by step by step. Okay. So that's just all sums of square stuff. This is really what we're after. Depends on the software program you have. Sometimes it spits out other things. If it's a nice one, it just gives you that, and it's obvious what you need. So if you're using Jamovi, it'll call the error term residual. And if you're using SPSS, it may say error. So here we're using a different distribution. So when we use T, we use a T distribution. We're using an F distribution. Comes from Fisher, by the way. Fisher fought with Bay. So when we use T, we use a T distribution. We're using an F distribution. Comes from Fisher, by the way. Fisher fought with Bay. So there's a big statistical long time ago. So here we're using a different distribution. So when we use T, we use a T distribution. We're using an F distribution. distribution comes from Fisher, by the way. Fisher fought with Bayes. There was a big statistical battle a long time ago. There are books about it. You know, read about it. Probably very exciting. I haven't mustered up the enthusiasm yet. So there was a Bayesian approach, and Fisher had his approach, and Fisher basically won. Although Bayes is coming back, in case you're interested. So you notice it doesn't look like the t-distribution, right? So it's a different distribution. Like the t-distribution, as I said last time, the t-distribution varies depending on the degrees of freedom, right? And that is also true of the f-distribution. The sea of values, and each distribution depends on your degrees of freedom. We have 2 degrees of freedom for our f's. Go back. We're going to have a degree of freedom for our conditions. That's our numerator, and our degree of freedom for our denominator, the residual. So that's our distribution. If you read an old paper, sometimes you still see it, and they'll report an outcome is not significant, they may not give the exact f value. They'll just say f is less than 1. Or if they've got a bunch of them because it's complex design, they'll say everything else was not significant, all f's less than 1. That's because in this distribution, if oh, there's my mouse, yay, my little cursor. You see that? It's a chart. If you're less than 1, you're not significant. It's not very strong. What do you make from this? So once you get out in here, that's when you start getting significant f's. And yes, there's a whole sea of values for f, and it depends on the alpha level you set as well. So, take a look here. So this is like the paired t-test one, except it's an ANOVA. And it works out all the steps for you. Again, you don't have to do any calculations on the test, but it's really nice to see where all these components come from and how it gets pieced together. You should be able to look at a table and figure out what values are, like including degrees of freedom. Right? So if I give a design that has a number of conditions, you got to figure out the number of conditions, usually that's pretty obvious, and the number of subjects, then you should be able to figure out what the degrees would be for the numerator and denominator. So, like before, each person's going to have a score in each condition, and you'll be able to play with these data. These are made up data again, for the point of purpose of learning. And you can do this up to 20 subjects. And I've color-coded it to try and help you realize which condition. So you've got 3 scores. It could be any sort of conditions, but we've got nothing, placebo, and ginkgo. And currently, our f value is 2.41, and our p value is 0.13. That's above 0.05. We know that's not significant. If you have an f value of 4, you can feel pretty good that's going to be significant. Just as a general rule. Okay. So you can, if you have our p value is 0.13, that's above 0.05. We know that's not significant. If you have an f value of 4, you can feel pretty good that's going to be significant. And currently, we've got 3 scores. It could be any sort of conditions, but we've got nothing, placebo, and ginkgo. And currently, our f value is 2.41, and our p value is 0.1. That's above 0.05. We know that's not significant. If you have an f value of 4, you can feel pretty good that's going to be significant. Just as a general rule. Yep. So you can. Join in as participants. You can do to make the data more variable. One thing I want to point out here, this is called an analysis of variance. So you think about how the t was calculated, we had 2 means in the numerator. You will notice there are no means in this calculation. What we're doing is analyzing variance. We want to know whether what we've done manipulation. What we're doing is analyzing variance. We want to know whether what we've done manipulation-wise is producing a difference, so that our different conditions, if they're all right on top of each other, then we wouldn't have any difference in terms of the variance. If they start getting spread out based on our manipulation, now we're affecting the variance. Okay? And we want to to be able to analyze that compared to other noise, okay? Other variations. So this just shows what we've gone through, and you can play with this. So you have your sub squared total, and I put condition here first. When I showed it to you a little bit ago, I did it second. And we have the subjects, and then the condition by subjects, which is just what's left over after you subtract out condition by subjects. Now, the nice thing here is that this term right here, the sums of squared subjects, just make sure we're on the same page conceptually. That's how subjects are varying. We get to subtract that out. Because each person has each condition, and we're only manipulating the condition, right? So we don't care whether Sam is different than Todd, because we get to subtract out our personal differences, right? That helps us. Well, if you're doing a one-way ANOVA, you don't get to subtract that out. It's between groups anyway. Okay. So it shows the values just as before. It gives you all the degrees of freedom. Now in this example, we've got 3 conditions, right? If you do a t-test, you've got 2, right? Do a repeated measures ANOVA, can you go with 2 conditions? Yes. Values just as before. It gives you all the degrees of freedom. Now in this example, we've got 3 conditions, right? If you do a t-test, you've got 2, right? Do a repeated measures ANOVA, can you go with 2 conditions? Yes. Yes. Yeah. And if you square your t value, it'll give you your f value. This works out that way. Significant with one and significant with the other. Why choose one over the other? Okay, it doesn't really matter when you report. It's going to be the same in terms of outcome. One reason you might choose one over the other just happens to do with what you've got elsewhere in your paper. So if you've got a single experiment that you're reporting, you move to your t-test. Let's say you've got multiple experiments in your paper, which happens often. Lots of field evidence. So let's say we have a more complex design. We're using an ANOVA. We've got these 3 conditions elsewhere. Maybe we've got 2 factors. Well, for consistency's sake, it might be that you report your other experiment that is more simple. Not a right or wrong. It's just a decision. Is there a limit to the number of conditions? No, it just gets harder to do the experiment.
Tired boy, tired boy. This is a tired.
Number of conditions. No, it just gets harder to do the experiment. you've got your data. You can copy them in from Excel if you like. I've set this one up as though your employer is giving you data, but they've been in a rush, and they say, hey, look, you got to go label things yourself and run the analyses. I don't have time. I'm like, cool, I learned how to do that at uni, and now I'm getting paid to do it. I didn't think I'd ever be doing this. Not like me. All right, so I set this up. It's got numbers. If you want to go in and label things, which is a really good idea to do, you just click on the column at the top. So this for me is basically dollars. Is a participant number. Okay? It's a case number. And when I'm looking at the data file, it helps me keep track if I'm looking through it. Because if I discover an outlier, then I can go find, oh, that's participant so-and-so, and look across and see all the numbers. So you'll notice here that I've got 4 other columns. That's because I made 4 conditions instead of 3. So label them. Drug A, drug B. Actually, we'll make these continuous. So Jamovi is pretty straightforward to use. Very nice. And drug D. All right. So get out of that. Okay. So now I've got our data, and we could go do descriptives. Actually, what I do after I get my data, I don't go run off and do my ANOVA. What I do is take a look at the data. So I'll get frequencies, histogram, get descriptive stats. And part of what I'm doing there, getting a feel for the shape of the data, and checking to see what it looks like there's an outlier. Sometimes if there's an outlier, actually as a human error, it's kind of coding it or something. There's a lower likelihood of that happening the more you have the computer do, as long as you told the computer to do the right thing. So if you're doing transcription information, you've got numbers on a piece of paper, and you're entering them in, errors will occur. One of the best lessons I ever learned about doing research, passed down to me from one of my early mentors. I say passed down to me because it's passed down to him. Anyone who comes and works with me gets this lesson, and the lesson is there are errors. I don't mean just under doing. There are going to be errors. Don't assume that you're doing errors. The important thing to do is try and find if any of your errors. It's a very different mindset. Hopefully you get all the big ones. And if you're lucky, maybe you have them all. So if you're doing transcription stuff, that's right for making errors. So you've got to like be really obsessive. Double check, triple check. When I did that sort of data entry with that particular professor, we were doing reaction times. In those days, the stuff I was doing, we would get reaction times, computer record it, we'd spit it out. So on this piece of paper, you hear this dot printer. Anyone see those? You hear this zzz, zzz, and it's printing out. You have a big, huge long list of RTs. And we take those, and I'd say what the RT was, and he'd enter it data-wise. Maybe it's faster. I hadn't had to practice yet. We have to take that, and we put it, so that become our data file. And those data actually set up to mainframe. Man, that's so cool. So then you can do like that. But the point here is that errors are made, and so we had a 1 beer rule. That we couldn't drink more than 1 beer while we were doing data entry. So there I was having a beer with my prof. It was pretty cool. Especially cool because he had a little fridge in his office, and it was actually a dry campus, which meant that you weren't supposed to have alcohol on campus. I thought this was a lot of fun. All right. So let's say we've gotten our descriptive stats, and now we're going to do our repeated measures ANOVA. You click on ANOVA, repeated measures ANOVA. So you go to the repeated measures factors. This is just a labeling place. So we might call this drug condition, and then our first level is, oh, that was stupid. Well, let's do it this way. Look at that. Yeah. Let's do that. There we go. See, errors happen.
Okay.
That I want to keep. Oh, it doesn't really matter. I'll do it anyway, but thank you. It doesn't matter. We didn't even have that when I was a student. So there we go. And so we're in our ANOVA. And we'll call this. So you just labeling to help yourself. That's all this is. That's a control condition. That's drug A. That's drug B. And then that's drug C. Okay. Now we take these and put them in the next box. Right there. Things are going to happen. Voila. Now you haven't seen these data yet. We don't have that many participants. Okay. But here's our F ratio. That's somewhere well north of 4. That's a general guideline. And P is less than 0.001. So significant? Say yes. Highly significant? Okay, you get times next not to 1 the lesson. All right. So sometimes people will say something is highly significant. Where did you set your alpha? 0.05. Yeah? Okay. So here's the thing. You've got a horse race, right? You're betting. I'm going to give you the money, all right? You have free money. Go bet on a horse race. And you get to bet that there's going to be a difference between your 2 horses. It doesn't matter which one it is, but it's going to be a certain amount, okay? And if that happens, we'll call it a significant amount. Significant. All right, so they run the race. And it's this difference. For those of you at home, can't see, I just put my hands farther apart. It's hard to remember that stuff. All right, so it's a bigger difference than what we specified, okay? What happens if it's this? Now you bet on this difference. What if the horse wins by this much? All right, my hands are twice as far apart. You get more money? They're gonna pay out more? No, because you bet this much. Okay? Now, if you bet them to be a jillion lengths difference, and it comes out, will you get more money? Yeah, because that's more long shot bet. Yeah? So the thing here is if you get something bigger than what you specified, you don't get to make claims about that because you didn't predict that in the first place. Okay? So if you want to set your alpha at 0.001 and it comes out, then fine. It's not so humble. Just so you know what I'm saying. All right, so you get a significant outcome here. Now we want to know, this just means there's a difference in there somewhere, right? Just like the one way to know it. So we can go to post hocs. You can also do assumption checks here. Like you could do a sphericity test. This is a complicated mathematical test. If you violate sphericity, it's sort of like violating homogeneity of variance, and you can correct for it with your degrees of freedom. If you have a robust enough effect, it's not going to matter. So post hocs. Oh, it did it so fast. I hate it. So if you get a significant outcome, that means there's some difference in there somewhere. Okay? There are different post hocs to choose from. Some are more literal. It means you're more likely to detect a difference, whether it's true or not. And there are some that are more conservative. It depends on your software package what options you have. It depends on a programmer to a program and how they calculate those differences for the different comparisons you want to do varies. We've got 4 conditions. Now we're doing a drug study. So we might just want to compare each of the drug conditions to the control and not care about how the drug conditions compare to each other. We could limit our number of comparisons. It might be that we're interested in all the comparisons, so that all pair. If we start doing that, once you start doing more statistical tests, because you write cookies, you know what's likely to happen by chance is what. It might be that we could limit our number of comparisons. It might be that we're interested in all the comparisons, so that all pair. If we start doing that, once you start doing more statistical tests, because you write cookies, you know what's likely to happen by chance of comparisons. It might be that we're interested in all the comparisons, so that all pair. If we start doing that, once you start doing more statistical tests.
Tired.
Because you write cookies, all the compare. We've got 4 conditions. Now we're doing a drug study. So we might just want to compare each of the drug conditions to the control and not care about how the drug conditions compare to each other. We could limit our number of comparisons. It might be that we're interested in all the comparisons, so that all pair. If we start doing that, once you start doing more statistical tests, because you write cookies, you know what's likely to happen by chance is what? Yeah, what type of error? Type 1. Yeah, so you keep doing enough statistical tests, by chance you're going to get one significant. Yeah? So we want to protect against that. So if we're doing all the pairwise comparisons, you're increasing the number of tests you're doing. Each comparison is a test. Now, if you only have 3 condition comparisons, you're increasing the number of tests. Yeah? So we want to protect against that. So if we're doing all the pairwise comparisons, you're increasing the number of tests you're doing. Each comparison is a test. Now, if you only have 3 conditions, you're actually not doing too many comparisons. But as you increase the number of conditions, this also applies to one ANOVA, and more groups, more comparisons. You start getting at 4, 5, 6, 7, you think about all of the pairwise combinations, that's a lot of tests. So we want to try and protect against that type 1 error. Always try to balance type 1 and type 2 errors. So Jamovi doesn't give you very many options, and that's in a way of blessing, because then there's less to think about. One thing you can do is no correction. That's like doing a series of t-tests. Don't do that. That's being really, really liberal. There might be an occasion where you do that, but you would admit that you're being really, really liberal. It's okay to be liberal in a political sense. Chaffee is more conservative. There's no good reason to do a Chaffee test, generally speaking. That's not just according to me, that's according to people who are, Mark Wilson calls a stat god. So there's a guy named Howell. Man, he knows stats. Really, really, really textbook writing kind of guy. He'd say, why would you ever do a Chaffee? So Tukey tests are actually different types of Tukey tests, but the one that usually people think of is Tukey HSD. He died in my lifetime, actually. Well, doesn't seem like that long ago. He did lots of things with statistics. And what this Tukey test does is uses the t distribution and tries to do some correction for the number of comparisons to keep alpha in check. So when you do your original comparison, you got your alpha set at 0.05. There are different ways to try and accommodate that, but basically each of these pairwise tests is more conservative than saying each one. You don't really see that correction when you get the output, but that's what it's doing. The Bonferroni does it similarly. It does it in a more simple way. You just take 0.05 and divide by the number of conditions. Suddenly you realize it. See that correction when you get the output, but that's what it's doing. The Bonferroni does it similarly. It does it in a more simple way. You don't really see, but basically, so distribution. Let's see what that on. The Tukey test, actually different types of Tukey tests, but the one that usually people think of is Tukey HSD. He died in my lifetime, actually. Well, it doesn't seem like that long ago. He did lots of things with statistics. And what this Tukey test does is uses the t distribution and tries to do some correction for the number of comparisons to keep alpha in check. So when you do your original comparison, you've got your alpha set at 0.05. There are different ways to try and accommodate that, but basically each of these pairwise tests is more conservative in setting each one at 0.5. You don't really see that correction when you get the output, but that's what it's doing. The Bonferroni does it similarly. It does it in a more simple way. You just take 0.05 and divide by the number of conditions. And suddenly you realize that you end up with something much more conservative than 0.05. If you only have a limited number of conditions, let's say you have 3, whether you do a Tukey test or a Bonferroni, not really. As you start to increase number of conditions, so if you get out 6 or 7 conditions, the Bonferroni is going to be much more conservative than Tukey. So would you do the Bonferroni or would you do the Tukey? Well, that depends on whether you want to protect more for type 1 or type 2 error. It also might depend on your name. How much power you've got. But for free, you should be fine. All right, here's what you don't do. You notice I haven't ticked on, well, I did tick, I didn't mean to tick. What you don't do is go tick on all the different options and then see what comes out to work the way you want it to. Well, it's not working. That's how it doesn't work out. No, doesn't work out. So what you have to do is pick one. Now, does anyone come knock on my door and check that that's what I did? Stat release, and we want to know whether you actually did what you're supposed to do and picked one instead of like running them all and choosing. Yes, I did because that's what I did. Because I'm that kind of person. But you have to be that kind of person. It's just all honesty. Yeah? So you pick one and you stick with it. Yes. Yes, that's one way to do it. And that's one thing that people ask now with pre-registration. The flip side is if you pre-register, then you're locked into that. That's okay, but you're locked in. And then if you didn't want to do that, you might say, we're using exploratory stuff. And then you got to do it. So here's something that can happen with submission, is that you send something off, and maybe we've done a limited number of comparisons because that's specifically what we're interested in. Sometimes you get reviewers as well, I really want to see all the pairwise comparisons. So that's why sometimes people do all the pairwise comparisons, even when it's not really what they're most interested in. But I encourage people not to do. The reviewer says that to me, I write back to the editor, make a decision and say, they don't get to tell me which stats are going to stat based on numbers. I understand they want to know that, but that's not a reason to not tell them. So then, now, if you're learning about the stats and you want to see how it comes out, then yeah, tick them all. Okay, but you wouldn't do that in practice. So I had a student who did research with me from UCLA. She came into a directed study project, and we had different ways to analyze the data. And she had to pick because it was her data. Yeah, it's my project, but it's her data. So there's no right or wrong, but you got to stick to it. And it was wonderful watching her agonize. Because she'd never done it before. All right, you can go away, give it some thought, and then you pick. So that's part of being honest. Next time, it's all right, we're good. Next time we'll talk about being blind. Maybe I'll come to school blind. All good with that? All right, we'll see you on Wednesday.
Oh my God, I studied. Yes, look at me. Oh my God, it's 12. Okay, bye-bye. Please, the boy studied really well today. Okay.